Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to have Dharma friends around the world. It really is a thrill. And joining on the interwebs together like this with our literal webs of light, it's really nice. I think it's a great way to hold ourselves together and hold the world together as well. So we're looking at how Buddhism helps, and it's a little bite-sized teaching based around what are called the three principal aspects of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and correct view. And what on earth are these topics? They're not all that they seem. So today is on renunciation, and perhaps for that one, I think it is the strangest one of them all, because it certainly hasn't been apparent to me what on earth it meant. I've got to admit that when I hear the term renunciation, the first thing that comes to mind is like, no more fun. And so I really get a little bit disconcerted then when I start. But luckily, that's actually just a misconception of mine. So renunciation is actually about emerging from dissatisfaction. And that kind of really resonates with me. So we're going to have a look today at how to become free of the endless cycle of craving and disappointment, how to not get distracted from following our dreams and our goals, doing the things that we love doing that really matter to us, and yet how much time do we get to spend on them, and how come we get distracted, sidetracked, and also how to make sure that our good intentions don't get corrupted, because often we can start off really well, and then the next thing you know, it's just degenerated into a mess, or we've lost our way. And it's, well, I don't know about you, but for me, it's come upon me, how did this happen? So how to kind of guard against that so that our good-heartedness doesn't get corrupted. So let's take a moment to adjust our motivation for today's class. And we can think about, we've got our immediate or temporary motivation, what brought us here today. And then we've got our motivation that's the long-term one. Why are we here? How does this fit into the scheme of things? So often our temporary motivation is just to ease our pain, to ease suffering, and to help us be a better person, to help us be a helper, not a hindrance. And that is a good place to start. But we don't have to leave it at that. That can be quite limited. And especially if it's just to overcome immediate problems, then if we do overcome the problem, then all of our motivation's gone. So the long-term motivation is not just to ease suffering or to hope that we don't have too much of it, but to uproot the very causes of suffering forever, to actually achieve the freedom and peace that we long for, and to bring everyone along with us. So we can have that as our motivation by starting right now here with ourselves, but with this long-term goal, setting the direction in a really positive, frame of mind, and a really vast direction all the way to the ultimate goal, nirvana, enlightenment for all. And be really quite happy that we have an opportunity to head in that direction right now this morning. So let's have a look at what is renunciation. So renunciation is wishing to be free of the cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. And it's often translated as a determination to definitely emerge. So those 8 auspicious symbols, and one of them is the symbols of the 2 golden fishes. And so the fishes jumping out of the water like that is a symbol of renunciation, of emerging from the sea of samsara and jumping out of it. So I really like this picture. This is us. We're gonna jump ship. So what are we actually renouncing though? And this is the crucial part. So we are renouncing Suffering, yes, we all do that spontaneously. Who here hasn't thought, I'm sick of it, I'm sick of it all, I'm just over it? Not just humans feel like this, but animals feel like this. Everybody feels like this. We're nobody wants to suffer. It's not an intellectual thing. It's deep within our bones, in our instinct. Are we renouncing happiness? No, no, no. There's nothing wrong with enjoying things. There's nothing wrong with having joy in our life, with having a good life, or an enjoyable life. So of course, we're not renouncing happiness, and don't ever think that it's all doom and gloom or even feel guilty about happiness. We need happiness to keep on going, just as we need food to keep on going. But what we are renouncing is the causes of suffering. And this is something that we have not done before. So I find this quite mind-blowing, that even though none of us want suffering, it's very rare to actually renounce the causes of suffering. So I was trying to think of some examples about this, and just recently, different parts of the world are going through different stages of the cycle of COVID and lockdowns and opening up again and vaccines and no vaccines and the whole thing. And so at the moment, where we are, we're going through this kind of thing where everyone's pretty sick of social distancing. They're all missing getting hugs from each other. It's very inconvenient, and we don't really have much COVID in the community. And so people are annoyed at the restrictions. They're annoyed at the government. So this, to me, with my logical mind, I'm thinking, actually, even though the restrictions and the government are inconvenient and are ruining people's mental health, they're actually there to keep us safe, because what's the reason for them is COVID. But when things are going just a little bit okay, then we slip. And instead of actually blaming COVID for the restrictions, we blame who puts in the restrictions. It's easier. And the moment you do, then you shut the door. You're blaming these kind of, you're blaming the messenger. From a Buddhist angle, sometimes we experience this where if we have vows, we start resenting the vows. Oh, I can't do this anymore. I can't do that anymore, as if it is the vows that are making us unhappy. It's, a lot of Western Sangha disrobe because they have vows of celibacy, and then, they're put into situations where they start having attractions to other people, and then having that vow of celibacy, they think that's what's making them unhappy. But actually, whatever vows that we have, like my hankering for a drink, 20 years on, I still have a hankering for a drink, especially when I listen to raucous gypsy music. But it's not the vow, I'm not to drink, that's making me unhappy. Actually, that minor inconvenience of having the vow is what's protecting me. So in our society, when we have lockdowns and restrictions and all things like that, we think that's what's making us unhappy, but actually that's what's protecting us. But because our senses are drawn to the immediate and to the external, we can't see. We just blame that very first thing. And so, of course, we don't get to the root of it, which is we have to eradicate COVID, just like we've been able to eradicate smallpox. Then we can be free. What a tragedy, this mind state that we have. And it's not a rational thing. It's not intellectual. And it's actually, this whole process is the driver of samsara. So in a way, we are, to put it a bit harshly, we're ignorant of the nature of reality. So we look outside ourselves for happiness, and we also look outside ourselves for the reason for our suffering. We like to blame outside of us. And because outside of us, all of those things and people and everything, they're unreliable, they change, they're dependent on so many other factors that they're never going to be stable. So of course, then we go up and down like a yo-yo continuously. So the three types of suffering, what we're renouncing, and generally what we renounce is the obvious suffering of pain. And actually, we think that is our problem. Physical pain, emotional turbulence, sicknesses, mental health issues, really difficult situations, like if you're born disabled in some way, where it takes a lot more life maintenance than other people. So all of that obvious pain. But in a way, because it's obvious, it is easier to deal with, because you can have a very physically difficult life, but still have a happy heart, still have real quality friendships, still be able to contribute enormously to society. But because we're so drawn by our senses, that the obvious suffering is the one that we see and we latch onto. Often it's the one that motivates us to do things as well, to try and do something about it. But then His Holiness the Dalai Lama said there's this other level of suffering, and he calls it the suffering we're seeking. So this could be a cartoon of me 20 years ago, right? So, oh yes, glasses of champagne, how wonderful, fantastic. And then, you know, more is better, right? And at the end of the night, perhaps even the next day, oh no, the consequences, quelle horreur. Like, who would have thought? So 15 years later, after 15 years of hangovers, I finally put two and two together. So the suffering that we're seeking, worldly pleasures, we seek our lasting happiness in pleasures that go up and down, that are ephemeral, that change, that don't last. Why? Because our senses are constantly drawn out there, and then we think that the happiness is in the champagne. And so then if I have the champagne, I'll have the happiness. So all of the joy that we get from music and food and sex and drugs and rock and roll and all of those things, I'm not bagging any of that. But if we rely on it, then we're in trouble, because none of those things last. And even if they do last, then the pleasure of them wears off. We're over it. You know, we get sick of our clothes, we get sick of our house or our job or our family, all of those things. And then we think, oh, I just need a bigger, better one. So we go off seeking it again. There's a third type of suffering, and it's the main one. The suffering of being dominated by ignorance. None of us want problems. None of us want suffering, pain, emotional distress, but we continuously make problems for ourselves. Why? Because we're seeking happiness outside of ourselves. We're dominated by ignorance, by a fundamental confusion. We want to be rid of suffering, but we want to keep the causes of it. We want to drink the champagne, or at least I want to drink the champagne without having the hangover, as if somehow I could separate those two things out. So just before I go on, are there any questions before we go a little bit deeper into this? Questions, comments, anything? Oh yes, Alexis.
Well, when you were talking about the three different types of suffering, I was writing them down to see if I could remember. So when you were talking about the suffering of ignorance, is that also known as the suffering of suffering?
No,
Okay.
the suffering of suffering is obvious pain, obvious distress,
okay.
Whether it's emotional or physical. It's the one that's a no-brainer.
Okay. And
then the suffering that we're seeking,
mm-hmm.
that is, what's the term for it?
There's also the one, the suffering of change. Is that
Yes.
the suffering of seeking? Okay.
Yes. So
And
the suffering of
is
change.
Is the third one being dominated by ignorance? Is that conditional suffering?
Yeah.
Conditioned suffering.
It's otherwise known as all pervasive compounding suffering.
Okay.
So all pervasive is it's within our very samsaric system. And compounding, meaning that we attract more suffering. Like we have a body, yay, we can experience all sorts of nice things with it, but it needs maintenance and food, and it ages and it gets sick, and it's only downhill from here. It's not uphill. It's just going to get worse, not better. So that's the all pervasive and compounding, because often when we try and do something about it, then we make things worse. So that's the one dominated by ignorance, because we don't know what to do about it. We're just panicking, as Venerable Ravina often points out. That middle one, the suffering of change, the suffering that we're seeking, changeable happiness. So actually just ordinary happiness we don't see as being in the nature of suffering, because we just see it in its little tiny box of the bit that we like. And just like me with the hangover, I somehow think that the hangover is separate from the champagne. So that's why it's called suffering of change, or just ordinary happiness, the suffering we're seeking. So I have something from Lama Yeshe to read that really kind of points it out nicely. So he says, okay, so the word renunciation has a different connotation. People often get scared that they'll lose their pleasure, but without renunciation, there's no way out. First of all of us consider that we would like to be free from ego mind and the bondage of samsara, or cyclic existence. But what binds us to samsara and makes us unhappy is not having renunciation. So what is renunciation? What makes us renounced? The reason we are unhappy is because we have extreme craving for sense objects and we grasp at them. We're seeking to solve our problems, but we're not seeking in the right place. The right place is our ego grasping. So we have to loosen that tightness. I want you to understand that renouncing sensory pleasure doesn't mean throwing all your nice things away. And even if you do, it doesn't mean that you've renounced them. Renunciation is a totally inner experience. It means less craving. It means being more reasonable instead of putting too much psychological pressure on yourself and acting crazy. We should have less grasping at sense pleasures, because most of the time our grasping at and craving desire for worldly pleasure does not give us satisfaction. That's the main point. It leads to more dissatisfaction and to psychologically crazier reactions. That's the main point. If you have the wisdom and method to handle objects of the five senses perfectly, such that they do not bring negative reactions, it's all right to have them. As human beings, we should be capable of judging for ourselves how far we can go into the experience of sense pleasure without getting mixed up and confused. We should judge for ourselves. It's completely up to individual experience. It's like champagne. Some people cannot take it at all. Even though they'd like to, their constitution or their nervous system doesn't allow it. Other people can take a little and others can take a bit more. So we have to be really honest with ourselves, don't we? And start changing the direction of where we're looking. Now I have this other quote. This is from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So this is about the all-pervasive compounding suffering. That one that is just there as like low level, kind of below our conscious awareness, and it permeates everything. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, when moths see a candle flame. They think it is a good place to go. It's like me, when I see champagne, I think it is a good thing to have. Those moths, they don't think that it will burn their body. They have no fear. If they were afraid, they wouldn't so purposefully fly straight into it. The more you try and stop them, the harder they try to enter the flame. This shows the nature of the animal mind. Anyway, when those moths fly into the flame, they're expecting only peace and happiness. They have no desire to suffer. They don't plan on getting burnt. So why do they go there? It's because they have no fear. And their lack of fear is due to their lack of understanding that if they go there, they will suffer. What happens is the complete opposite to what those ignorant creatures think will happen. They get burnt and they die. It's very important to understand why they force themselves to experience this suffering. What makes them do it? Understanding this is the real science. This is the best way of studying science. Why do moths intentionally fly into the flame? Why do they try their hardest to get into it as quickly as possible? It's because of their own ignorance. Their mental obscuration prevents them from discovering the actual nature of the situation, that the fire is hot and will burn them. Their ignorance makes them perceive the situation differently from the fact of it. And some people might think that the moths are happy to be in there, but they're not. If they knew what was going to happen, they'd avoid it at all costs. I find this so moving, the way Rinpoche teaches. He clearly cares about every single sentient being, like each individual moth. He's really feeling for them and really feeling for us too. So I've put that the main gist of that quote into your notes. So I was talking about the virus and the lockdown, but it's similar with climate change. We don't blame the cause of it. We forget that climate change is a result of our actions. And, if we want to actually change it, we've got to go through some minor discomfort. But when we're so addicted to the senses, it's very difficult for us to see that far into the future. We've kind of lost sight of it. So renunciation, that's why I've put this picture here with the suffering, the moth flying into the flame, dominated by ignorance. We think that will bring us happiness, and yet constantly we are surprised. So with renunciation, when you hear this word, what it is, it's what keeps us safe. And it's actually, if we have this attitude of renunciation, it means that our life becomes better. So it doesn't mean giving up all your friends and possessions. What it means is giving up the distorted relationship to them. So, we have this distorted relationship, and the way we see things, we think if someone's yelling at us, showing their angry, ugly face at us, we think they're an angry person. We forget they're suffering. If someone's peddling, crazy conspiracy theories, we forget that they're a human being like us. We just see that face and we get impatient instead of seeing underneath is confusion and suffering, and just like a moth flying into that flame again and again and again. So giving up our distorted relationship with things and people and objects means that we can be a little bit like this other picture of Mona Lisa, which is all the nuance and the fragility of our relationships, how ephemeral they are, how ungraspable they are. So if we actually developed renunciation, our life we'd be able to actually achieve the freedom that we want. And that's a catch cry, isn't it now? I mean, we want less stress and we want our freedom. So we have to actually really go for where can our freedom be found. So if we have renunciation, immediately we become more optimistic, more relaxed. We immediately have less stress. But it's really the last, because it's counterintuitive, it's the last thing that we think to do to relieve stress. In the terms of our entire lifespan, if we have this sense of renunciation, we'll be able to have a lot more stability in as our life goes up and down, as the worldly situation changes, as our goals are thwarted or we achieve them. We will be able to die without regret. We'll be able to bring meaning to our life. Why? Because we haven't got, you know how they say, don't sweat the small stuff. We haven't got involved in all that minutiae and blaming and this and that and grasping. We've actually kept the big picture. And ultimately, now this is the one that we want, isn't it? Freedom. We want freedom. We've got to look for it where it can be found. So freedom's only possible if we remove not just suffering over and over and over again, but the cause of suffering. That's the real radical teaching of the Buddha, how to remove the cause of suffering so it cannot happen anymore. Then we get what we want. So what's stopping us? What's stopping us? This really, really practical teaching on what are called the 8 worldly concerns. So these 8 worldly concerns, they're called worldly, not as a value judgment, but just as a nod to another way that you could call them is unstable concerns. So it's like that flame, you know, they're our worldly concerns. They're the most obvious ones, and they're what derail us every time. Even good-hearted, clear-thinking people can be derailed. And what derails us are these worldly concerns. So they're usually really short-term, and when we get sidetracked into them, it's like drinking salt water. You know, it's just never ending. That is the cycle of samsara. So let's have a look at them. You'll probably be quite familiar, and I've tried to find some funny examples. So there are 4 sets of 2, and the first one that looks the most obvious, we're always seeking the pleasant, pleasurable things and avoiding any kind of pain or discomfort. With the pleasure, we're always trying to adjust ourselves, aren't we? Adjust our comfort levels. And while we can adjust our comfort levels, while we can wriggle on our seat, we think everything's okay. But if you had to sit there like throughout the whole hour of my class and not move a muscle, you'd be in agony. So we kind of think everything is okay if we can just constantly hop from one thing to another. But the moment, for instance, that we have lockdown, or the moment we have restrictions, then our pleasure evaporates, because our pleasure comes from out there. We don't have any sense of it within. So when our circumstances change, it's all over. And with pain, we avoid the discomfort, the unpleasant. Now, the classic example of this is if there's anyone here who's ever avoided going to the dentist, you know, we have a fear of pain, a fear of the dentist, and we'd rather have our face swell up and die of sepsis and blood poisoning than go to the dentist. So that's this danger, isn't it? It's just the danger of ordinary pain. And yet we can think of, you know, a whole lot of amazing athletes, for instance. They're not scared of pain. So what's their secret? How come they, you know, they can run marathons and do all this training and do it on like mean to do it, like put all those hours in, often for not even any money? Why? Because they're thinking of the long term. So they're thinking of their medal or whatever 4 years into the future. So when we think of the benefits, the pain subsides. For us, we want liberation, nirvana, enlightenment, and all of our other goals that come in between. And so while we keep our mind on that big picture, we're okay. But the moment we just go back to, oh, it's a bit inconvenient, or I'm a bit tired now, or I'm a bit too stressed to do it, and we start just avoiding pain, then we lose our goal. It derails us every time. So I've seen this in Buddhist centers many, many times where people get sick and they go, oh, I can't come to puja today because I'm too sick or I'm too tired. I just got to go home and have dinner and rest. It's like, yep, that might do it for tonight, but it isn't going to alleviate the causes of all of your suffering. In fact, you've missed a trick there. I remember one night where a man came to puja and he was dying of cancer. He couldn't even sit up in a chair. He had to lie on the couch. And he knew it was the last puja he was ever going to come to. And that's why he wanted to come, because he wanted to sit in the gompa and gaze at the face of the Buddha. So he knew that the end of his life was coming. Whereas when we're grasping at permanence, we think, oh, we'll just put these things off now because there's plenty of time. So he came to puja. He was delirious through it all. He was so happy to be there. He was in a lot of pain, and he died 6 days later. So there's a real difference of what we can grasp as the reality is quite different from what our ordinary senses say, oh, just go have a snooze or just rest or I'll do it later. So our just simple grasping for pleasure and avoiding pain gets us into a lot of trouble. And the other one with pleasure, like for instance, who hasn't overeaten? I love chocolate cake. I love cheesecake. And I have one slice and then I think 2 slices is better. And then you go, oh, whoops. And, that's happened my whole life. Okay, then the next 2, we're seeking gain and we avoid loss. We like the idea of profit, of acquiring things, of getting a bargain at a sale, buy 2, get 1 free. So we do, woohoo, I got a bargain, and we forget, actually, I didn't want any. Or we do this thing where we'll buy the really cheapy version because we think we've got a bargain, and then it breaks within a month. We have to buy another one, like women's shoes. When I buy women's shoes, they're finished within 6 months. If I buy men's shoes, I get like 6 years out of them. But you have to pay the money. And again, with loss, the amount of money that's spent on plastic surgery, on baldness. We seek to avoid loss and deterioration, but it's a real short-term thing, isn't it? We have an economy, it's called the sunken cost argument. So that's that one, the cliche goes, throwing good money after bad, where you invest in something and it's dodgy. And how many email scams and text message scams are out there where you lose your money? But what happens, why those scams are so effective and why people keep on running them, is that when they email and say, oh, you just need to just send another $10 to release the funds, you'd rather think, oh, yes, I'll do that and have the hope of the money coming than cut your losses and go, I've been scammed, I'll lose my money. So I remember reading in the New Yorker article, a doctor, clearly intelligent fellow, lost something like $300,000 to an email scam because each time he was thinking, oh, there's something not quite right about it. They'd contact him and go, oh, you just need to send another $50 or we just need to borrow $2,000 to have this thing work. And he'd go, oh, okay, because the whole time that he was putting the money in, he hadn't been scammed. But the moment he said, this is a scam, then he'd have to face, I've just lost $100,000 or $300,000. So he just kept on giving the money. So this psychology, scammers know it very, very well, but we don't. We just fall for it every time. We do anything to avoid loss and to grab a bargain. Then we've got praise and blame. So We seek approval, admiration, praise. We do anything to avoid criticism. We hate being criticized or blamed for something, especially if we didn't do it. We find it unbearable. Whereas actually, when you think about it, well, if we didn't do it, whether someone says we did it or not doesn't really matter, doesn't change the fact. So where this really trips us up is, for instance, with whistleblowers, so when you're a whistleblower and you expose some failing in your workplace or organization, people don't like it and they blame you for the fault. You just said there was a fault, but they're blaming you for it. And it can be quite serious that you lose your job and you become unemployable in your field that you've just spent years developing a career of. The alternative is to not say anything and then be eaten away by your conscience. So this is a really difficult thing to negotiate. And if we negotiate it with the worldly concerns, whatever happens, we'll be unhappy. So if we're just making our decisions because we don't like being blamed, or we're making our decisions because we can't bear people thinking badly of us, on the short term, it might be okay, but inside it's going to really eat us up. Or if we make our decision and we go, okay, I'm going to be a whistleblower, and then we get blamed for it and everybody heaps on us all of this hatred and anger, then we might really regret it. And then we might be unable to live with that regret because we doubt our own good-heartedness. Why do we doubt it? Because we've been swayed by these worldly concerns again of just not liking being in everybody's bad books. So I noticed with this one, I'm always in trouble. I'm always in trouble with somebody. I've always offended somebody or other. Whatever I said, I'm trying to be sincere and it comes out all really blunt and rough and it's like they're crying. I'm like, oh my God, So I've had to get over the fact that even though I don't like being in trouble, it's always going to be there. That's just my lot in life. And actually, if I'm not in trouble, I start getting worried. So it's given me quite a bit of strength actually then to really stand by my conscience. And I will say things even if it is uncomfortable, and I'll play the bad cop or even if I do get blamed for things, because someone's got to say it and I'm strong enough too. All right, and the last ones. Success and failure. So seeking success and status anxiety, a good reputation, being a winner, and being terrified of failure. Fear of failure, isn't that the biggest reason why we don't do anything? Because we're scared of insignificance, humiliation, people laughing at us, notoriety, being a loser. No one wants to be a loser, all of those things. So that kind of worldly concern, if that informs our career or our studies, we'll never get beyond the mediocre. To get beyond the mediocre, you've got to dare. And you think of all the inventions in the world, it came from hundreds of failures. Everything that we enjoy, all the marvels in the world that we enjoy come because those people were not scared of failure, that they didn't take it personally. So the worldly concerns takes it personally, does this thing called cognitive fusion, where if we fail at something, we are a failure. If we lose at something, we are a loser. But actually, that's not true. We're just no good at something. And often we're no good at something because we've never done it before. So of course, we're going to stuff it up the first time. No one's born naturally knowing how to drive a car, naturally knowing how to set up your emails, naturally knowing how to make your smartphone make you smart. None of that comes naturally. So why, when we do it and we start getting really demoralized, why do we feel like such a loser? Because we've taken it personally. So I found, actually, just as a sideline, the way out of that one is to have a hobby. Because in our hobbies, because we enjoy them, it doesn't matter if we stuff up. I've just taken up a paper course, paper engineering, to make pop-up cards. And I discovered I'm very, very good at folding, and I am absolutely useless at cutting out with a X-Acto. I'm an inexacto. I cannot cut a straight line to save my life. And I tell you, it's been really fun being crap at doing something. Like, it's almost a thrill to go to notice, oh, I'm really hopeless at this. And then to notice, am I a hopeless person? No, I'm just hopeless at this. And you actually have an experience of unfusing it. So having a hobby, you can really get a lot from that, where you can relish the mistakes. You actually enjoy them because you learn from them. Instead of just going, oh, learn from your mistakes and it's all a torture, you just go, wow, how fascinating. How did that happen? You don't take any of it personally. In fact, you get more involved in it. So believe it or not, on Facebook, I saw a quote that said something like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? It's a good question, isn't it? Because suddenly, if we remove the fear of failure, now we know what we want to do. So you can see how much it hampers us and how much it can actually hold us back from doing the very things that matter the most to us. Whether it is mending a relationship, whether it's having the courage to change your career, go in a new way, whether it's to have that fortitude to invent something after failure and failure and failure and failure. So yeah, that happens because of the cognitive fusion. We think, we are our behavior, which we're not. It's our behavior. So just take a moment to think, okay, with these 4 sets of pleasure and pain, seeking gain, avoiding loss, seeking praise, hating criticism, wanting success, avoiding failure, how much just in the last week, what's the ratio? Your worldly concerns and the ratio of you doing what comes from your heart, what really matters. What has the most sway over you? What ratio of time do we spend maintaining worldly concerns? What ratio of time for our long-term goals, those things that we know really matter? Another way that we can look at this is to think of all the activities that you've engaged in this week, just this week, from since, this time last week. What activities have supported your deepest goals? The things that you're yearning for in your life, even if it's just an overseas holiday, even if it's just a short-term thing like that. What this week has reflected that? Our goals for being a good, decent human being, for developing our kindness and tolerance, for whatever project that we're doing. What have we done throughout the week that has supported that? And that kind of shows, well, to me at least, how much of my time is just not spent on anything of consequence whatsoever. So it explains a lot, doesn't it? It explains why we can feel so hollow, why we are constantly dissatisfied, but also explains why our direction in life is so tenuous, so wobbly. So before we do a little contemplation, what questions or comments do you have about these worldly or unstable concerns? Who's got one? It says Tom Pearson.
I was trying to change it. My name's Catherine.
Oh, Catherine, hello.
Hello. I noticed that in my particular situations, especially the one I'm currently combating, which is a faith transition out of a high demand religion, which our entire extended family is very involved in. It's very deep, very intense. A lot of the good things that I would like to do for this progress also bring in young people. So I'm at that more developed, more mature phase of life where I want these good, healthy things. And then there's younger people who may not be ready to risk the blame, risk the sense of failure, or risk that the comfort going away of belonging. So as we have such independent motions inside, it's hard when there's other people who are impacted, young people, maybe not ready for that kind of action. It's hard to know.
That's right. And you have to be the example. So it doesn't actually matter what you say, you have to live it. And they'll just see you, they'll like being with you, and they'll go, if she can do it, I can do it. And they'll also say, she believes in me, I can do it. Because, you know, for me, when I was young, the single thing that helped me the most was someone saying, I believe in you, Miffi. I know you can do it. I know you can make the right decision. I know you can do whatever it is that you want to put your mind to, you can do. I encourage you to do it. That was the thing that did it. So all of the rest, you just have to be the presence there to encourage people like that. And then all of that fear, yeah, you can deal with the fear, but you can only do that if you've got the big goal. So normally what happens with the worldly concerns is we just try and deal with the little concerns, and it just makes it tighter and tighter and tighter. So we try and deal with stress, or deal with pain, or deal with failure, or blame, or criticism, and it's just like putting out spot fires. It's not going to work. Actually, we've got to get over them bigger and look at what do we want to do that really matters. Just like an athlete, they're not dealing with the sore toe and the tiredness and the horrible coach and the disgusting diet. And, you know, if they think about all of those things and dealing with them, they'd never do it. They're thinking the gold medal and they'll do anything. Then it's just like the seas part, you know, everything just falls by the wayside because you've got that gold medal right there in front of you. So our gold medal is freedom, real freedom, nirvana, freedom from confusion and disturbing emotions, and that is possible. So that's our goal, you know, being a good person, being a help, not a hindrance. And then, you know, you find your niche in life, and then you go, why am I doing that? Not for that niche in life, but to be a help, not a hindrance. And then every decision that you make is informed by that, not by the worldly concerns.
I appreciate that. Yes.
So thank you very much, Catherine. That was, yes. And then, you know, it doesn't matter what faith, what denomination, what age. But the big thing is you got to be the one that lives it, demonstrates it, as if you were doing it in a foreign language. Then it'll work. All right. So let's just have a little short contemplation. And the thing with this, of how to contemplate letting go of the worldly concerns, is to slow down, to slow everything down, because as we know, and as Venerable Robina often points out, it's because we panic, we're so reactive. So let's just become present, have your body relaxed, bring your focus inwards to your breath. Notice whatever physical sensations, just name them, let them be. Notice whatever emotional sensations, Just name them and let them be. And we're going to slow everything down and go into a deeper gear. Just for a moment, contemplating gain and loss. Do we want more possessions than we actually need? When we have our possessions, do we worry about them? Do we own them? Do they own us? Do they bring us the happiness that we're seeking? Success and failure, how are they bound together? Does our success in one area mean that we neglect another area? What is our success compared to? Often the greatest athletes will say that their main competition is competing against themselves, not against others, but against their own personal best, and that the greatest satisfaction comes from that. Thinking about praise and criticism. Does people's praise of you really make a difference in your life? Or do you constantly need reassurance? Just saying it once isn't enough. It's got to be every day, every week, again and again. And do you avoid criticism, shy away from it? Is it possible to actually develop and learn from our mistakes if we don't have the criticism? Often criticism or feedback packaged in a nice way with kind words is a lot more palatable than just the blunt feedback, but both are actually pointing out the same truth. Just like from the mouths of babes, what children say about us can be quite blunt and incredibly clear, but we find it just about palatable because it comes from the kids. And pleasure and pain. Are our momentary pleasures worth putting that enormous amount of effort into? Have we ever learnt from difficulties and discomfort, even from traumatic situations? Haven't we become a better person because of it? Actually developed some empathy for others where we didn't have any before? Tolerance for others where we didn't have any before? So can you imagine not being distracted from the things that matter the most? What is it that takes you away from your core values, from being the kind of person that you want to be, from doing the things that matter to you? Of those things that matter the most to you, just think of a few, 2 or 3 that matter most in your life. What actions can you start doing right now this week to support them? So the conclusion of this meditation is, don't give up what you want most for what you want now. Don't give up those really important things that are there. They're important, but they're often not in the urgent category. We give them up for our immediate short-term concerns. So make a determination to not give up what you want most for what you want now, to relax, to go to a slower, deeper gear. And take a couple of nice deep breaths and bring your focus back again. So it's quite a short contemplation, but it's there in your notes as one to go over in the coming week, just to remind ourselves. I find it's a little bit like just kind of changing the focus on the camera. What am I actually focusing on here? Because it's so easy to get more and more and more tunnel vision if you're not careful. So just before we finish, and I do a little summary, are there any questions or comments? Who do we have here? No, everybody's okay. A lot to think of. You know, we've looked at renunciation, right? So hopefully you've got a different idea of what renunciation is, that it's not giving up fun or giving up all of the joys that we so tenuously have. With renunciation, with releasing those worldly concerns, we will be able to enjoy life more. That's the thing, isn't it? With renunciation, we have more enjoyment, less stress, less worry. Life is better. It's counterintuitive, but it's the key. So those worldly concerns, they're the great corruptors. You know, we just get pulled into them again and again and again, and they corrupt everything that's good and wonderful, and all of our nascent, you know, wonderful qualities, trying to be a good human being. They just get hammered by those worldly concerns. So hopefully with that, another of our bumper stickers, you know, for each class, that one of don't give up what you want most for what you want now. It's worth thinking about again and again. So the summary: renouncing suffering and the causes of suffering. We've got to do the radical thing here, the new thing, renounce the causes. So we all renounce restrictions and lockdowns and rules, and the government's telling us to do this and that, but we actually have to renounce the cause. We've got to be careful with our health. We've got to get vaccinated and protect the vulnerable and contribute to our society by being a safe physical presence to be amongst. And on a deeper level, as a Buddhist, the causes of suffering, all of this comes from our own undisciplined behavior of acting, you know, ruining the environment and the wet markets in Wuhan and whatever, and not recognizing that what we do has consequences, longer term, down the track consequences. So to start looking at our own actions if we want to stop the causes of suffering. And from a Buddhist point of view, that goes even deeper to karmic cause and effect within our own mind over lifetimes. And that is actually the way to completely get that freedom that we want. With a sense of renunciation, of not sweating the small stuff, we will naturally enjoy our life more. The 8 worldly concerns distract us from long-term goals, what really matters to us. A meaningful career, a harmonious family life, you know, stopping the chain reaction of abuse, from intergenerational abuse. Just being able to do that is amazing. And it's the worldly concerns that make us lose our courage. The worst suffering is all pervasive, yet it's invisible to us. obvious pain, just all of that disease that we have, all of the discomforts from the worldly concerns, they are the messenger. They show us something is wrong. They're actually not the problem. Getting sick, having arguments with people, things not turning out the way that we want, all of that stuff, that's not the problem. That shows us that fundamentally we are not happy. Fundamentally, our heart, our mind is unstable. And so we rely on the world to find stability where it cannot be found. So every time we have a problem, we can think of it, it's a messenger reminding us we have this all-pervasive compounding suffering. That's the thing we have to do something about if we want freedom. So don't give up what you want most for what you want now. Go for the long term. So we can dedicate all of our efforts for that we can use our wisdom to focus our mind in this new way, and that way really achieve the happiness that we seek, the long-term lasting peace of mind that's there regardless of when the world goes up and down. So next week we're going to have that's the final week. We're going to look at Bodhicitta, which is about helping without burning out. So compassion that's unbiased, takes responsibility for the welfare of others as well as ourselves, and how to do that so it becomes a fuel to keep you going rather than being burnt out. Also what to do with all of our feelings of empathy that can often overwhelm us, and then we just can't deal with it anymore. So how to actually harness all of that to be able to benefit ourselves and others. So I hope to see you all next week, and enjoy your week in this new way. So remember, enjoying it doesn't necessarily mean it's pleasant. It means making it really useful. Okie dokie. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Miffi.